Hi there, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for another edition of the Phoenix Phenomenon. My name's Roxanne McCarty-O'Kane, and I interview high-profile Australians and bring you their stories of triumph over some of the biggest challenges that we face every day. So today I have with me paramedic and extreme fundraiser, Rhys Greedy. Thanks for joining us, Rhys.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for having me, Roxanne.
Not a problem at all. That's great. So Rhys is a paramedic with the Queensland Ambulance Service, but for the past few years, he's been taking on some pretty extreme challenges and pushing his body to the limits, all in the name of fundraising. And I believe has clocked up more than 60,000. Is that right? For various charities.
Yeah. So at this stage, I think the last 4 years has seen approaching the $70,000 mark, actually, and that's not including the $20,000 that we're hoping to achieve as in a group setting for the fundraiser this year. Which the trip for that's actually coming up in only 6 weeks' time, so it's almost here, which is very exciting. It's a paramedic founded and orientated fundraising campaign, which has now been going for the last year or so. So yeah, it's a very exciting journey to be a part of, and just for me, something that I've continued on doing since 2014. So it's been an amazing few years.
Absolutely. And some people, when they think fundraising and trying to do good, they might do a sausage sizzle or something a little bit more low key, but you've gone all out, like taking on the biggest peaks in the world and really putting it out there. So
no, I've tried to there's nothing wrong with the sausage sizzle. They're a good money raiser, but I feel like it's been, I think, beneficial to me, not only raising money for good causes, but ticking off some pretty amazing bucket list items for myself. I mean, outside of work, I love getting overseas and doing some high altitude trekking and some pretty extreme mountain climbs. So I think since 2014, when all of this sort of started and blended in together, it's been amazing for me to do these trips, not just for myself, but to have a bigger picture in mind. So coming home, it's it just feels so much more special, rather than just ticking off that climb or that trek and knowing that I've done it for someone or something bigger than myself. So
absolutely. And I'd love to take it right back to even before 2014. What some of our listeners and watchers might not know is that you also went through a cancer battle. You were diagnosed with Hodgkin lymphoma in 2009.
That's right. Yeah.
So I think it was just before your 21st birthday, wasn't it? So
only a couple of weeks prior. Yeah. So January 16, 2009. Probably a date that I won't forget. I was in the army at the time and based up in Townsville with my work and my training within the military, and sort of back end of 2008 was when the symptoms started to arise, and following some investigation in January 2009, it was confirmed that I had been diagnosed with Hodgkin lymphoma. So at that age, I guess mentally rock bottom for a little bit there. Certainly not something you expect when I was only relatively new to my job in the Defence Force and loving what I was doing, and a lot of areas of my life just went from 100 to 0 once I'd started the chemotherapy and radiation treatments. So 2009 for me, no work. I think I was very much down in the dumps, emotionally, mentally and physically. I mean, I was probably 20 kilos lighter than what I am now post chemo. So it, physically ravaged my body, which wasn't nice. And I think particularly in my job now, going to not only oncology patients, but also mental health patients and talking to them, I think I can acknowledge now that my mental health was affected by what was happening, and was probably too young and stubborn at the time to, acknowledge that. So I think a big part of my journey now with the fundraising, and particularly reaching out to cancer patients and, young men with lymphoma, is staying on top of that, that mental battle, not just trying to go through the treatment, because there's so many other areas that can be affected without you, actually sitting down and realising what's going on. So.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so I guess, what was it for you? As you mentioned, you were only young, of 21. What was it that, I guess, got you, focusing on the mental side of things? Was it a connection with a particular service or a support person or family member that helped you to engage that side and to start lifting yourself out of that?
Yeah, I think, I think at the time I very much had an alpha male mentality. So there was probably some ignorance to, my own situation. And I very much had the mindset that I just wanted to get to the oncology clinic, do my 4 or 5 hours of chemotherapy and get home and just try and get on with it. I think outside of my own mindset, my mother in particular was amazing for me. She's gone through cancer herself previously, and her side of the family, we have experienced losing family members, following cancer battles. So she was definitely my rock for the 10 months that I was going through my own treatment. And, we already had an amazing relationship prior to 2009, but I think for the years following, her and I, we have an unbreakable bond. And I think that's across the board with, anyone that's gone through any sort of cancer. The people that I've met over the last few years, you just seem to have this bond, even with a complete stranger. You subliminally know what each other has endured. And I've come across people that have lived through far more strenuous battle than I faced myself. But yeah, there is a pretty special bond. And again, with my line of work, I love sitting down and chatting to and opening up to patients that I'm transporting to hospital who are either currently going through or have previously been through a cancer battle, and they feel so much more comfortable talking to me in the ambulance, about what's going on then, because I've, to an extent, have gone through what they are experiencing. So that level of empathy for me as a paramedic, I think, is a very important aspect of my job with that caliber of patient. So I've been given huge benefit in that respect, and I treat my diagnosis like a blessing now, because it's certainly opened my eyes in a lot of ways. So
yeah, absolutely. And how do you think, you mentioned it was a 10-month battle for you, a 10-month treatment process?
Yeah.
How do you think you did evolve and I guess transform in that period? Not obviously you've had the physical impacts, but mentally coming out the other side of that, how would you describe that change in you?
Yeah, it did take some time. I was very lucky being in the Army. They were fantastic with supporting me through my treatment. And once I had been cleared in remission in October that year, I was given a compassionate posting down to the Army barracks in Brisbane, which was obviously closer to my family on the Sunshine Coast. So they accommodated for that, which was great. I was then put into sort of their health service and hospital on the barracks, and for 5 days a week, I was under the care of the staff there. And I think both physically and mental health wise was picked right back up. It did take some time, but over that 6-month window, I bounced straight back out the other end and was comfortable in going back to work and, continuing on with life and, my role in the Army, which was, certainly a strenuous one at times. Due to my diagnosis, I didn't get the chance to deploy overseas. There was 2 trips to Afghanistan, one while I was getting treated in 2009, and another trip that came up in 2012 that, due to being in remission for only such a short period of time, I think the precedent had been set with previous cases that they didn't want to risk someone being overseas, for 6 to 9 months and not being able to identify if something was to relapse, that's completely fair enough. And that is what encouraged my decision to discharge on my own terms. It certainly wasn't a a medical discharge. I made that decision myself, and I still served for 5 years, which I thoroughly enjoyed, and I think now it'll happen for a reason. I'm now in a career that I can see myself doing for quite some time, and I think it's my calling. So I think it's all fallen into place pretty nicely. So.
Absolutely. And so were you already feeling into paramedics, into a career in the health services by the time you decided to discharge yourself?
No, I actually looked into the police force initially, and I'd actually applied for Queensland Police whilst my my discharge papers were getting processed. So both ends of it was probably 4 or 5 months of going through the discharge process and also doing my application with Queensland Police. And towards the very back end of that application, things fell through. And at the time, I was devastated, and I had absolutely no thought process about putting myself through 3 years of full-time university, doing the Bachelor of Paramedic Science. But again, I think it'll happen for a reason. And university was very tough at first. You can imagine how little theory work us guys in infantry in the army actually do. So I felt like I was starting school all over again. But once I got into the swing of it, it's a fantastic degree, a lot of hands-on stuff. They get you out on road with working crews at stations around the place, and you get a really good exposure to what the job is all about. And that just solidified it for me that this is what I want to do. So 2 years in the job now, and yeah, like I said, I can't see myself leaving anytime soon. I absolutely love what I do. So.
Absolutely, that's great. So was there a particular trigger or a particular, I guess, situation that you came across that gave you that light bulb moment to think, paramedic science and QAS?
I think, like I said, I think 2014 for me in a lot of ways was very life changing. I think the first part, I did want to go down the route of emergency services, and when things didn't work out with the police, I only very briefly looked into the fire service, and the application process for that is a very extensive one. There's no guarantees that you will come out with a position anyway. So even though paramedics is a very competitive option once you get to the back end of the university degree, and some jobs are quite hard to come by, at least going to university, I would have had a bachelor degree under my belt, and I could have expanded into something else if the AMBO thing didn't work out. And I just wanted to, I guess, not coming out with much on paper from the military, just to have, some tertiary studies and challenge myself in that way. The option there now is to maybe expand into a master's degree and progress even further within the job, which is an exciting prospect. It opens up a lot more doors, particularly what I do outside of work with my climbing and that kind of thing. You can get into your helicopter rescue type roles, which would be the absolute dream for me. I
could so see you doing that.
Yeah, I know. I watch documentaries on Netflix, and I'm like a kid at Christmas watching these amazing rescue shows and what they do. So there's plenty of motivation there to do some further studies down the track. But for now, I'm very happy just consolidating what I'm doing on road, and certainly getting a lot of exposure down here in North Brisbane where I'm stationed. There's no shortage of interesting work, as you can probably imagine. So yeah, very 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 happy with how things are playing out, both inside and outside of the uniform. With my little passion on the side. So.
Yeah, a little passion on the side.
A little big passion.
Take us through how that all evolved. I mean, how obviously being active has always been something that you've been doing when you were young. But when did you decide to, I guess, really take it to that point where you're going, extreme climbing and mountaineering and all that sort of thing? Had that been a bit of a passion before you launched into the fundraising side of things?
Not as much as what it has escalated into. I've always been very, very outdoorsy. I think, time in the army, certainly encouraged that, the outdoor camping and living on rations and sort of physically exerting yourself in quite isolated scenarios. So bizarrely, I am one that enjoys that kind of thing. So again, 2014, June that year, I had signed up for a trip to walk the Kokoda Trail over in Papua New Guinea, and it was at the time more of just I guess, having served in the Defence Force, and obviously what, the story behind the trail with our with our Australian forces. It was certainly one that I wanted to tick off and experience, and what an amazing trip that was. And I think that probably set the benchmark. I remember chatting to one of the guys who was on that trip, who actually put me in touch with a Sherpa in Nepal, who he had done quite a few trips with over the years, and literally within a week of getting home from Kokoda, I had locked in a trip for the Annapurna base camp over in Nepal. And I think I had a moment while I was, walking through the jungle over there that, or a realization actually that October 13th that year was my 5 years in remission from lymphoma. And for some reason I don't know, I think at the time again, this is only sort of a recent thought process, that back then, initially, once I had been deemed in remission, I was a little bit, I guess, self-absorbed about it all. I just kind of swept it under the rug and just got back to, living my life. And, I don't think there was much, probably, not much empathy regarding other people, and, knowing personally what it was like to go through a battle with cancer. I probably should have been showing more consideration to, I don't know, it's a bit hard to put into words, but at the time when I was over there on Kokoda, and, everything was sort of just coming to mind about my own battle, what I'd been through, the fact that I could be in a situation where I could genuinely reach out to others and, use my story to even provide a bit of inspiration. That's where, on return, once I'd locked in the trip to Nepal, I actually got in touch with Lymphoma Australia, who are based here in Brisbane. And, they're a non-for-profit organisation. They operate on a much smaller scale than, say your breast cancer and your prostate cancer foundations. And just sent an email to the CEO saying, this is who I am, this is my story, and this is what I would like to do. And I mentioned Nepal, and they were thrilled that someone sort of came with this out of the box idea regarding a fundraising plan. And over the next few weeks, I had the opportunity to sit down with the CEO in person, and she then started to introduce me to patients currently going through treatment. And that just set the fire for, the passion that's now been ongoing for a number of years. The Nepal trip then escalated into the following year. I was over in the European Alps, and I summited the highest peak in Western Europe. So that trip, on top of Nepal, that ended up raising about, I think it was just shy of $15,000 for Lymphoma Australia, which went towards a lot of important research and, money to help patients and their families, with the financial stresses of someone being diagnosed with cancer. And I think of all the fundraisers, probably the one that was most special to me, just because I was, in dealings with people who I could directly relate to what they were going through. So yeah, from there, once that wrapped up, I just had no desire to make it a once off. I kind of set the tone that each year I wanted to, depending on sort of time and place where I was at in my life, somewhere or someone that I could reach out to and coincide some fundraising and awareness with the trip that I had set out to do for that year. So 2016 was the Kilimanjaro trip, which, I mean, the story behind that is quite unique, but it all turned out for, I think, an absolutely amazing 8-month journey. I had actually walked into Nambour Hospital, and was on my way to the oncology ward, following the work I had done with Lymphoma Australia. I wanted to continue the trend with reaching out to cancer patients and raising money there. And within the hospital, I'd actually got lost, and I approached a directory sign, and for some reason the pediatrics ward stood out on that sign. So I made my way into there, and 8 months later we'd raised $22,000 for the pediatrics ward at the hospital there, and successfully summited Mount Kilimanjaro. So I've sort of found that, being brave enough to, I guess, create an idea with these sort of things and going through with it, you can certainly, create waves with the people that you're trying to reach out to and the communities. And those first couple, I was sort of Sunshine Coast based, and I just realised that community is just incredible when it comes to reaching out and, assisting financially and, with any sort of donations and help they can provide. And these were no, big organisations. These were family-run businesses who were still trying to get by and support their own, and were more than happy to reach out and provide assistance. So that part of it's actually been amazing for me to see, because I physically couldn't have done these without the help of those around me. The ideas are great, but I obviously need the assistance of others. And the Sunny Coast in particular has just been incredible. So.
Excellent, that's great. And obviously going, you can't just wake up one morning and go, I'm just going to head up Nepal, just climb mountains. Like that.
I think a couple of the trips have turned out like that.
Mentally you can have that thought, but the process for you, you have between having the concept and then actually attempting the summit, like that would be a huge process for you. And getting through the training, not only just the normal fitness training, but also dealing with altitudes and dealing with all the other challenges that come with mountains. So
absolutely.
I'd like to find out a bit more about that.
Well, that certainly has been a very challenging part of these trips. Obviously, Australia really has no sort of elevation whatsoever. It's crazy to think that the basis of my training, using, say, the Glasshouse Mountains that are only 300 or 400 meters high, where I'm training for mountains that are over 6,000 meters high. So, and the temperature, the isolation. But again, I think going down the path of these sort of trips, to me, the mindset is that because it's a little bit unique and a little bit crazy to some, that draws interest, which then brings on awareness and also, generosity with donations. So, the one, I guess, going back to last year, which I believe you did a story on, the returning to Kokoda with Ryan, and we set the 30-hour benchmark with completing the entire 96-kilometre trail, and we fell just short with 32 and a half hours. And I mean, physically that was, I probably won't compare that to anything I'll ever do for quite some time. Taking out the element of altitude over there, that terrain, and what we attempted to do was very brutal. But again, amazing cause behind it. There was obviously some personal reason with the passing of Ryan's father due to a heart attack, and reaching out to the cardiac ward at the Sunshine Coast University Hospital. So again, I think getting back to the training, the fact that I'm not doing these things for myself, there's always that motivation, and I think having you guys in my corner who are making publicising stories and getting that awareness out there, it's a feel good scenario, opening up the paper or seeing the story on the news of a night on the telly, and seeing yourself and realising that the story's actually getting out there. Certainly motivation that you don't want to fail what you're setting out to do.
You're accountable now.
Well, that's right.
Yeah.
But the training for me, I mean, the trips that I set out to do, so using this next one for an example. So April will be my third time back to Nepal, and doing Everest Base Camp with a very large group this time. I'm kind of gotten used to
find out why you've gone, because normally it's maybe one or two, either or you've got a buddy, but all of a sudden it's like, I think it's 22, is it? You've got a giant.
It is, huge group, which is going to make the trip absolutely amazing. I was approached by a company, which is actually a paramedic founded company called Earth Trails. So they normally run biannual trips to either East Timor or Nepal. And the trips are mostly based around sort of education and providing first aid and, aid camps to remote communities in those countries. But this trip was sort of a one-off fundraiser, and I was approached in June last year. It was actually only a matter of weeks before I left for Kokoda, so I was very sidetracked at the time. And once I got back, I ended up driving down to the Gold Coast and having a chat to the director of this company, who's also a current serving paramedic himself. So in short, they decided to go down the path of organising this trip for Everest Base Camp and trying to get a predominant group of paramedics. We're raising money for the Queensland Ambulance Legacy Foundation, which again, it operates on a much smaller scale than, say, your Defence Force or your QPS legacies, and they heavily rely on fundraising and donations to sort of get by and support the people that they endeavour to look after. So basically, whether it be a paramedic, him or herself, or their direct family, if circumstances arise that, I'll use a recent example of our colleague who sadly lost his life in Mackay only a couple of weeks ago whilst he was responding to a job, and he's left behind a young family. So Legacy immediately reached out to them and provide financial support. So they're sad circumstances, but they're very, very special ones. The gentleman that I have been in touch with, who's the director of this trekking company, his young daughter, who was only 2 or 3, is currently going through treatment for her own cancer. So it's completely put their lives on hold, and he's not working as much as what he should be. And his wife is obviously taking the 24/7 care of their young daughter. And, he endeavoured to thank Legacy, who reached out and provided them financial support. We set the goal of $20,000 to, as a bit of a give back. So that was the original idea. And I mean, initially for the trip to be viable, we only needed about 6 people. And this is the power of social media. I simply just put a post on Facebook just to get expressions of interest. And 48 hours later, the trip was over 20. So, which I think is amazing. Every individual who has signed up for the trip has given a $500 donation to Legacy, so that's already $10,000, and we're well on the way to getting the other 10. So $20,000 to an organisation like that is monumental. And having the opportunity, I've sort of taken on the role of the expedition leader for this trip, which is a bit daunting because I'm sort of used to looking after just myself with these trips. But
I guess, I'm assuming many of the others in the party haven't been there twice before, though, right? So.
Well, not much experience with it at all. So, but that's exciting. I mean, the opportunity to, I guess, take people over, and because Nepal is just such an amazing country, I can see myself going back there for many years to come. So having the opportunity to introduce people to, the people over there, the culture, the amazing environment that we're walking in, and just having the chance to again, continue on my own personal journey of the fundraising, which I obviously can't take credit for this one. I think sort of my focus with the role of the expedition leader has been the most important. It's actually been amazing to see the other guys in the group sort of take charge with the fundraising, and they've all thoroughly enjoyed doing it. They've all got the mindset that it's going to be a very challenging trip. But again, we've obviously got that bigger picture in mind, which, provides so much more motivation than I think people will realise once we're over there. It starts to get a bit tough. So
yeah, absolutely. And I guess with having such a big party, does that bring other logistical challenges and things, or does it not?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when the group size expanded as much as it did, the company needed to recruit a 2IC. I wasn't logistically able to, to lead a group that size on my own, which I was very happy that there's an extra set of hands there.
Yeah.
And obviously, Everest Base Camp is one of those areas in Nepal that is fantastic regarding any sort of extrication or evacuation if things turn a little bit nasty, whether it be physical injury or altitude sickness. The evacuation services, particularly via helicopter, are absolutely amazing. So we're completely covered for all those incidents. Touch wood, it doesn't happen, but you've always got to have a contingency plan in mind. So again, for me, it's a lot of focus, and I've had to sit down and do a lot of homework behind the scenes regarding that side of things, because it will be me that will be sort of coordinating those efforts if it comes to that. So I think this is a great opportunity, for my own expansion regarding, these trips, and obviously continuing the fundraising element. But I feel if all goes well with this trip, hopefully I can continue. I love what I do on road as a paramedic, but like I said before, I would love to start branching out into maybe more remote sort of rescue and, more evacuation, chopper related rescue services. So this again could be hopefully the start of something great. But for the moment, just very excited to again, fifth year in a row, I believe, for ticking off another incredible trip and continuing to raise some money for a great cause.
Absolutely. And you've jumped up a few. You've done Kilimanjaro, Nepal, you've done the Himalayas, you've done the French Alps. I'd love to find out what are some of the biggest lessons you've learned, while you're physically on that journey, while you are on the mountain. There must be some really profound mental things going on at that time.
Oh, and I think a funny mindset for me is for some reason I actually enjoy the isolation, the bitterly cold temperatures. I find it refreshing. You fly into these foreign countries. I deliberately don't activate any local SIM service, so there's no phone contact. I'm occasionally doing the Wi-Fi thing to obviously update, particularly for my mother's sake, to let her know that I'm still there. But it's actually really refreshing to just be cut off from first world technology and first world problems, I guess, for the couple of weeks that I'm there. And sort of the further away, this time last year I was actually over in South America. It wasn't a fundraising trip. I actually treated it as a training, I guess holiday, probably a funny word to use, but in the lead up to Kokoda, I just really wanted to get the legs and lungs, iron strong. So I went over there for about 18 days in Ecuador and just summited one. They're still considered volcanoes over there. A couple of them were actually active that we were climbing. Five in a row. And I think, I'm always looking back at the photos and the videos of that. And at the time, there probably are moments where, you get up they're called alpine starts. So you're up at either midnight or 2 a.m. and you've got to throw all your gear on and step outside into the minus 20 degree temperature and start walking for 10 hours. And, there are absolutely moments where I only briefly think to myself, why have I paid thousands of dollars to put myself in this situation? But that's just completely evaporated once you're experiencing the most beautiful sunrises on earth when you're thousands of meters above sea level and, finally getting to the summit of these mountains. And then these are I guess, hobbies of a minority group. I think it's not particularly in Australia. I mean, that's why a lot of the trips I've kind of struggled to recruit +1s or 2s or, groups of people, particularly with the more technical stuff, because, so in Australia, we haven't got the luxury of these huge mountainous environments where you can get the training and discover your love for it. So, I mean, my first couple of trips, I was kind of going in cold with any sort of proper training or preparation. I just learnt on the go.
And what were some of the biggest lessons you did learn in those first couple of trips?
I think probably the biggest one was my second trip to Nepal, which was at the end of 2017. That was my first year in the job as a paramedic, and again, going back to what I said regarding the fundraising, I like to apply it to time and place. I actually did a fundraiser for QAS Legacy back then, and I set myself the task of an almost 6,500 metre mountain in Nepal, and I got about 250 metres from the summit and had to turn back. And that was actually the first time that I had tasted defeat with these trips, and I was... And I think that was compounded by the fact that, I had the banner in my bag that was ready to. Oh, you back? Oh, yeah. I had the the banner in my bag that was ready to be pulled out at the summit to show that I had done this for legacy, and the money had been successfully raised. So all that was left was to, the easy part, just get to the top of the mountain. But like I said, the first time that I actually had to turn back, and that was just an error on the boots that I'd chosen, and they weren't cut out for the temperatures that I had experienced. So I actually ended up with a bit of nasty frostbite on my big toe on my right foot, and it took about a year for the sensation to come back. So it was it was actually a relatively serious injury, for that environment. And I could feel what was going on, and I knew in my mind that, 250 metres over there, it may as well be 2.5 kilometres. It's one of those situations where it's another, 2 hours of return walking, and I probably would have come back to the country and been having to learn to walk again, because they probably would have had to take my right toe, and there's no theatrics there. The photos I have of the significant sort of blistering and tissue damage, it's a fine line between it being superficial and the limb being, completely destroyed essentially. So I think looking back, and what helped was when I came back, and I was still obviously devastated, and just hearing people be so positive, the fact that I'd, just simply stepping out and attempting is such a big step, and just reminding myself that it's not about me. It's, I've come back, and the money's still there, the awareness is still there. There's still been so much positivity about the months prior, and what has been brought to light with, at that time, QAS Legacy. So that trended into last year when we fell 2.5 hours short of our 30-hour goal, and it didn't even faze me. I was still so thrilled that had been achieved. By the end of it, we were just both so happy to get over the finish line anyway. We sort of planned high fives and man hugs, but both of us just pretty much collapsed to the ground and got on the bus and went back to the hotel. There was physically no celebrations could be had.
I'm not surprised by that at all.
No, but that was a good learning curve. Yes, I like to set the bar high, but I can't be disappointed that, at the end of the day, I've given it my best shot. And, I think that's as cheesy as it sounds, that's applicable to a lot of aspects in life. And it's good to try and spread those messages with, with what I'm doing. And that's why I've particularly tried with a younger male population, just regarding their own cancer battles, and, putting aside the alpha male mentality. It's okay to be vulnerable, because I'd never been more scared in my life than when I was going to my chemo sessions and getting hooked up, for 4 or 5 hours. And I honestly, at the time, I refused for my then partner and my own mother to come with me. I just didn't want anyone to see me in that, in that state, which is not the way to do it. That's another thing I've encouraged, is just, let them in and go through the process with you. It's not something you want to try and take on yourself, because I've seen firsthand with my own family members, things up here start to deteriorate. Your body's simply a vessel that will just follow. So big part of the cancer battle is staying on top of the mental game, and that's really what I've been trying to push with my own message. And that ties in with my training and preparation and the trips that I do, because to me these sort of trips are the pinnacle of physical and mental endurance. So,
and I guess what advice would you give, not only to young men but to anyone who's going through their cancer battle, to keep that mindset uplifted? Because that, I think, would be the biggest challenge. There's so much going on, so much for you to process. Is it a matter of reaching out, making sure you speak to people? Is it connecting with support organisations? What sort of things would you recommend?
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, there is so much available now, regarding, cancer support services, like any other health or mental health service. Simply picking up the phone and you can be in touch with someone. I mean, my own mother, she still to this day, she will do volunteer work for Bloomhill up on the Sunshine Coast. And it's fantastic to have people to sit down and talk to who have been in that situation themselves. It completely takes out the that fear of the office and the white coat situation. You're not sitting down and talking with someone who, sometimes it feels like they're just going through the motions and they're throwing terminology around that you're not relating to. Whereas I've been big on meeting people at a coffee shop, relaxed atmosphere, and just talk to them like a human being, like a mate. I feel those atmospheres, and you just see people, it could be a first time sit down and they're opening up like you've known them for 10 years. So I think first step is definitely acknowledging that it's not something that you want to go through yourself, family, friends, exterior sources, and just always being honest about your fears and your vulnerability. I had a great opportunity to one of the Cancer Council Relay for Life events a couple of years ago. I had the opportunity to be an ambassador for one of those events down here in Brisbane, and thankfully my public speaking has improved since I've started doing all this stuff, because I stress the point to them that as soon as you're diagnosed, you're immediately placed into a very special caliber of human being, and you're going to go through things that people, regardless of how much you say the chemo was this and the radiation was that, they'll never fully grasp what you've endured. So I think taking it in your stride, and I don't expect everyone to start climbing mountains. Like I said, this is my own crazy way of, I guess, relaying a message. But everyone that's been through something like I have and come out the other side, you're already an inspiration. You don't need to do these fantastic, over the top challenges. I mean, simply sitting down and telling your story to someone else who's maybe going through it themselves is more life changing than I think people know.
Yeah, and I think that I was talking to Alan Peace the other day, who obviously has been through he's been through a couple of cancer battles himself, And
Mm.
interestingly, he was saying, with the majority of cancer survivors, more often than not, they just want to forget it even happened. And
that's
doing that,
exactly what my mindset was. Yeah.
yeah, and it's kind of, it's not allowing those who are experiencing that to have that
Yeah.
one-on-one interaction and to know that they're not alone. So,
Oh, exactly right. Exactly. Like I said, man, we're all just normal people from normal walks of life, and like I said, I think the best way to sit down and relate to someone, and something that I didn't do when I was going through my treatment. You know, obviously I had my own mother, which she's battled cancer herself, and she was fantastic in so many ways. But I think it would have been nice to, you know, if I had the opportunity to sit down with a young bloke, you know, who could say, well, look, mate, I was diagnosed at your age, you know, the prime time of, you know, about to turn 21, and my life changed. But here I am now. I'm 30, and I'm doing fine, and you're going to be the same. You know, it's huge motivation for someone to look at someone like they're looking in the mirror and not give up. You know.
Absolutely, and it's coming up to 10 years. This is your 10th year, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah.
October 13th is my second birthday. So, I mean, especially the last 5 years, it's been just an absolute whirlwind of amazing things. I've lost count of how many amazing people I've come across in my life. I'll say my new life of you know, this journey that I've started. I mean, 10 years sounds like it is. It's such a long time, but I can remember 2009 like it was yesterday. And I mean, this is just another of what I have been doing, because it's incredibly humbling. And you know, sometimes I had this discussion with my girlfriend the other night. I don't openly sort of just start telling people about my story, because I don't want to feel like I'm putting myself on a pedestal, or you know, I'm more than happy to talk about it when propositioned, or you know, in these scenarios, because I like to spread the message. But I've just never been one that I'm more of a actions speak louder than words kind of guy. So that's what I want to continue to do. And you know, if I can just have an impact on a handful of people each year, that's job well done, in my own opinion. So
absolutely. And I guess, as far as, you know, obviously you've set the tone now for a challenge every year. Do you ever feel like you will revisit the ones that got away, or are you happy to move past those and to look for other opportunities moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the mountain that I got so close to in Nepal a couple of years ago, that will be a return trip, 100%.
Yeah.
And at the moment, obviously the focus is Everest Base Camp, and following that, I'm sort of looking into next year. They're trips that you like to try and plan quite some time in advance. So yeah, a couple of ideas in the works at the moment, which is exciting. So it's looking like at this stage I'll probably return to South America. And there's two options at this stage that I'm looking into. And initially I wanted to try and do something around the date this year for my 10 years. But the dates were set in stone with this trip with Base Camp, which was obviously April. But again, I mean, thinking back, I mean, April 2009, I was sitting in my oncology chair, getting pumped full of chemo drugs. So to think 10 years down the track and what I'll be doing, that's still pretty incredible to me. And obviously doing it with an amazing bunch of people for another good cause. So, you know, my little tradition with the 13th of October is just to go down and sit somewhere by the water and just watch the sunrise and just have a peaceful moment and sort of think about what's taken place over the last decade. And sometimes, you know, normally a tear shed.
Yeah, understandably so.
Understandably. But yeah, that will probably be the case again this year. But yeah, obviously a little bit more special. 10 years to anyone who's gone through cancer is one hell of a milestone. So I'm very much looking forward to being part of that. So.
Absolutely. Excellent. And for those who are watching and really connecting with your story and what you're doing, what's the best way for them to, I guess, to keep in touch with all of your adventures and to show their support as you go along?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, around these trips, my social media, I like to just sort of base it around keeping everyone updated. So certainly in the coming 6 weeks leading up to the trip, and particularly in April, just on my Facebook page, I'll pretty much dedicate that just to giving updates, and even jumping on the Queensland Ambulance Service Facebook page. The media team has been fantastic for us, getting the message out there, and they're going to be out again over the next couple of months, sharing not only some fundraising related posts, but also regular updates in photo and video form while we're overseas, which will be exciting. We'll be able to have yeah.
Sorry, I lost you for a second there. I lost the end.
Oh, did you? Sorry. I was just saying, yes, the Queensland Ambulance Facebook page and Instagram pages are the ones they're going to be sort of our movements while we're overseas. Second day, short photos to see how the group is tracking, and then hopefully we'll have our big celebratory banner photo once we reach base camp. And I'm very confident by then we will have reached, if not exceeded, the $20,000 goal that we've set out, which is incredible. So
yeah, absolutely. Excellent. All right. So for those of you who are watching and listening at home, I will pop some links to those sites down below, so it's easy for you to click through and support where you can. Yeah, obviously QAS Legacy is a really, really important charity, as you've heard from Rhys, and they're doing amazing work with lots of families across the state. So, but yes, unless there was any other pearls of wisdom you wanted to share with us today at all, Rhys? No? I think you've done pretty well.
Sorry, I feel like I've absolutely chewed your ear off. Sorry.
No, it's great. It's the best kind of interview. So thank you so much for your time today, and we really do wish you all the best in this latest endeavour and all the rest that are yet to come. So
yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And just a quick message, anyone that watches this, I mean, I'm more than happy to sit down and, whether it be a message, a phone call, or even if you're around Brisbane, have a sit-down coffee. If there's anyone that's going through any sort of personal or close family struggles that are cancer related, I'm more than happy to have a sit down. Important to reach out and take there, and I'm more than happy to share a coffee and have a chat about anything that you may need to talk about. You'll realise how much it may actually help things along. So please reach out if you need to.
All right, that's really wonderful. Thank you so much for that, Rhys, and thank you again for your time today.
No worries. Thanks, Roxanne. Thanks for having me.
Not a problem. And so for those of you watching at home, we will continue to bring lots of amazing interviews with people like Rhys who are doing incredible things with their lives despite overcoming some incredible and really really amazing challenges in their lives. So if you'd like to keep following the Phoenix phenomenon, please make sure you like and subscribe, and we'll keep you up to date with some of the many journeys that are yet to come. So thanks, Rhys. Enjoy the rest of your day.